Story 1. About 4 years ago, when I just started my job as a laboratory technician, I began taking the bus to work every morning. It was quite convenient since the bus stop was just a few blocks from my apartment, and there was another stop only a few hundred feet from the parking lot at my workplace. The place where I worked had a long driveway that curved around in a way that almost made it look like a regular road. A couple of stops before my workplace, there was a popular supermarket. Back then, I had the typical college girl look, short purple hair and chunky glasses, details that turn out to be relevant to this story. There was one specific bus driver who regularly had this route. Every time we pulled up to the supermarket, he'd stare at me for about 5 to 10 minutes. Sometimes he'd clear his throat or announce, "Well, we're here," as if waiting for me to get off. But since it wasn't my stop, I'd just sit there, usually listening to music and doing my best to ignore him. I figured he was just ahead of schedule or something, so I didn't think much of it. Still, he began getting more irritated with me every day. After a few months of this, he suddenly got angry and confronted me. He wanted to know why I wouldn't get off at the supermarket stop and why I insisted on getting off in the research park instead. He even suggested that I didn't want him to see where I actually worked. He accused me of lying about where I lived and worked. I was completely baffled and told him that I had no idea what he was talking about. I explained that I didn't work at the supermarket and that the road he mentioned was just a driveway that led to a parking lot. He became furious, insisting that he saw me in the store every day. He claimed he could spot my purple hair and glasses from a mile away. I was even more confused because I had seen plenty of other girls with the same hairstyle and glasses. It was a college town, and purple hair was practically a trend. We went back and forth, him convinced that I was lying, and me feeling increasingly creeped out. He then started asking why I never acknowledged him when he supposedly rang up my groceries and why I always kept my headphones on while on the bus. Apparently, he'd been trying to talk to me at work because I ignored him on the bus, and vice versa. The whole time, he'd been confusing me with someone else, but it was clear he didn't believe it. He was visibly in his 40s, while both this girl and I were in our early 20s. A few weeks later, after the situation didn't improve, I decided to call in a complaint to the main bus terminal. If he wasn't sulking or making passive-aggressive remarks toward me, he was telling other passengers what a cold little ice queen I was. I thought his behavior was strange and uncalled for, especially since it was 6 a.m., and all I wanted was to sip my coffee and prepare for the day ahead. Eventually, I had enough of being targeted by this strange older man who was angry with me for not working at a supermarket. After my complaint, there was a new regular driver on my route who was much friendlier and didn't give me any trouble. A few months after filing the complaint, I stopped by the supermarket on my way home. I hadn't seen that driver since, so I hadn't thought much about it. By that time, I'd even found a shortcut through a fence that made it easier for me to walk to the store without taking the bus all the way around. As I went to pay, I realized the cashier was a young girl with purple hair and chunky glasses just like me. Here's the thing, though, we didn't actually look alike at all. Her hair was cut differently, a different shade of purple. Her glasses were black while mine were purple. She was petite while I'm curvier. She had freckles, and I was a few inches taller. We made eye contact, and after a few seconds, she asked, "Do you ride the bus?" I said yes, and we just stared at each other for a few moments. I apologized, explaining how sorry I was that she'd also been dealing with this situation. She just handed me my bag and told me it wasn't my fault. We never spoke again, and I have no idea what happened to that creepy bus driver, or if he continued bothering her after my complaint. To this day, though, I sometimes still wonder what that whole situation was really about. Story 2. This is from a few years ago in Florida. The rehash: my great-grandfather purchased 3,000 acres in Florida in the 1800s. It has been in the family and a working farm ever since. After my father passed, the land was divided between my brother and sister and me. My brother and sister sold their portions to a development company, and at the same time, I purchased a neighboring 850 acres. On to the story. After the development company built up the area with single-family home, they transferred control to a new homeowner association which became officially registered in 2016. It was at this time that unstamped letters began appearing in my mailbox. The first was an introduction of the new homeowner association and included about a 20-page CCR that was essentially a contract and had so many rules and regulations. Since my family land predates the homeowner association by well over 120 years, I am not obliged to join any such group, so I ignore the letters and start marking them "Return to Sender." Now this alerts my postal carrier, who questions who put unstamped mail in the mailbox. And he took those letters and went to have a conversion with the homeowner association about illegal use of the mailbox. Now, while this is a farm, I was not using it fully, but instead, I had at the time about a dozen rescue animals as well as 3 quarter horses. I arrived home to find a pair of cars at the entrance of my driveway, blocking my access. My driveway is almost a quarter of a mile long, so I parked and walked. At my house, I found my wife arguing with 3 people, 2 men and a woman, who are demanding to be allowed their rights to search my property inside and out. After a quick briefing, I inform my trespassers of their violations. I then give them 10 minutes to get off my property and move their cars before I tow and impound them. These self-rigorous individuals were not budging, so I walk to one of my barns and start up something inside, and back out with an older model Holmes tow truck and start backing down the driveway. These 3 ran to get into their cars and were gone before I got to the end of the driveway. Now this would be nice if it ended there, but then it would not be much of a story. I started receiving fines. Yes, in the mail and unstamped. Actually had to get the local postmaster involved. Illegal use of the mail system, and mailboxes are a part of that, are a federal crime. I even got a fine for calling the postmaster on them. The homeowner association had to pay a $10,000 fine for unauthorized use of the USP system. Fast forward about 6 months, and my wife notices that there is a lien on the house and property. This is where I contacted a property rights attorney, who immediately filed with the local government and finance agencies our dispute to the legality of this lien. It took a couple months, but the lien was dismissed when the originator failed to show up to a hearing. But it does not end here. Oh no, it does not. I received a large packet that came with certified mail detailing all the fines I have incurred since the homeowner association came into existence, and they demanded immediate payment. Included in this was a $500 fine for not signing the CC&RS, $1,000 fine for not allowing board members access to search my property, $10,000 fine for repayment of fine the homeowner association had to pay for the homeowner association breaking federal law. And the list goes on and on. My attorney laughed and sent a cease and desist letter as well as a demand that all further correspondence must be direct to her office. That lasted about 6 months, until my wife again noticed a new lien on the property. What the hell, I thought. So back to my attorney and more laughing. Turns out, the homeowner association put a lien on the land I purchased, which is still separate from the family land, and so we repeat the steps above. During this time, while my wife was in hospital for delivery of our second child, and everyone was there to support her, the homeowner association trespassed again and started searching through my property, including its barns, garage, and outbuildings. They even tried towing several vehicles that I had on the land that were not licensed. Yeah, they are for farm use. Picture a rusty old pickup used to haul hay and feed. An old car with no doors we used to check out the field and search for animals. Now they were caught in the act by the local sheriff's deputy who was just doing a drive-by. No one was arrested, and I chose not to press charges. However, this infuriated the homeowner association, and another large packet arrived with more fines on top of all the previous fines. Another trip to my attorney and more laughing, and this time, she contacts the county clerk's office and manages to stop another lien that was in the process of being posted. This time, in order to post the lien, the homeowner association would need to show up at a hearing and explain. Yep, They did not show and Leon vanished. Now just a reminder, this is in Florida, and my family and property are not part of any homeowner association. Story 3. One of my uncles, Travis, is looking to buy a home. He mentioned this to me a couple of weeks ago and asked about the process. I suggested that he and his family get their funds together sooner rather than later. By this, I meant that he should collect the money owed to him by my other two uncles, Randy and George. I figured they might have more questions once they got further into the process, so I didn't give it much more thought. For some background, Randy and George owe Travis money because he gave them funds for a down payment on a house they were all supposed to co-own. The plan was for Travis and Randy's families to live there, which they did for a while. Travis's family eventually moved out due to space limitations, but they were apparently paying rent while they lived there. Why they would pay rent despite already having contributed to the down payment and supposedly being co-owners, I don't know. I had advised Travis at the time to be cautious and ensure he was legally protected, but he didn't follow that advice. After he moved out, Randy and George rented out the now vacant second unit. Randy essentially lives there rent-free, while George didn't have to contribute any money to gain ownership of the house. Randy and George were supposed to repay Travis for his down payment, but it's now been about 4 or 5 years, and he still hasn't received it. The other night, Travis called me. We started with some small talk, and then he brought up the subject of buying a home again. So I asked if he had any specific questions about the process. He said he did and wanted to know if I would support him on the loan and help with the down payment. By support, he meant co-signing on the loan and contributing to the down payment for a home I had no interest in buying or managing. Travis mentioned that he had talked to Randy and George about getting his money back. They told him they needed more time, but suggested he reach out to me to support the loan in the meantime. I thought I must have misheard, so I asked him to clarify. I wanted to be sure he was indeed coming to me for assistance with the loan and down payment instead of collecting what his brothers owed him. I told him no, that this wasn't something I was willing to do, and ended the conversation shortly after. I could hardly believe the nerve it took to even ask. This incident only reinforced why I keep a certain distance from some family members. Update. I visited my mom yesterday so she could go trick-or-treating with us, and she shared more information that made me laugh at how absurd, entitled, and out of touch this request truly was. It turns out they didn't just ask me to co-sign the loan. They also approached my dad, asking if he would help fund the down payment. I am pretty sure that by help, they meant for him to cover the entire down payment. Naturally, my dad declined. Apparently, my uncle can get a loan, but it isn't enough for the kind of house they want. They're aiming for a 2-family home relatively close to the city where we live. They're unwilling to look farther out, which would be more affordable given the loan he qualifies for. They want a multi-family home specifically so they can rent out one of the units. Their grand plan was for my dad to pay the down payment and for me to co-sign so they could secure a more expensive home. They intended to rent out one of the units to help cover the mortgage payments, and they would repay my dad whenever they could. They didn't even suggest that the rental income would go directly to my dad. Instead of asking the people who actually owe them money, they came to my dad and me, essentially hoping we'd buy them a home. My relatives have a long-standing sense of entitlement, but this crosses a line even for them. I am still shocked that they thought it was acceptable to make such a request. Story 4. I've been a Boston Celtics fan since I could walk. My dad raised me watching Larry Bird highlights, and we'd spend countless hours in our driveway practicing layups and three-pointers. He always told me stories about the great Celtics dynasty, and I soaked up every word. When he passed away last year from cancer, I promised myself I'd honor his memory by staying dedicated to the team we both loved so much. I worked 2 jobs during my senior year of high school, weekends at a local grocery store and evenings at a pizza place. Every penny I saved went straight into my Celtics fund. My goal was simple: buy season tickets as soon as I turned 18. My dad and I had always dreamed of being season ticket holders, but we could never afford it. After 6 months of working double shifts and surviving on minimal sleep, I finally saved enough. The day I turned 18, I bought those season tickets. It wasn't just about watching basketball, it was about fulfilling a dream I shared with my dad. Everything was perfect until the last game of the regular season. I arrived at TD Garden 2 hours early, as usual, wearing my lucky Celtics jersey, the last gift my dad gave me. I was standing in line at the concession stand when this middle-aged woman approached me. She asked me if those were season tickets in my hand. When I confirmed they were, she immediately assumed I must be holding them for someone else, maybe my parents. I told her that no, they were actually mine and I had bought them myself. That's when her whole attitude changed. She started going off about how ridiculous it was that someone my age had season tickets. She questioned whether I even knew anything about the Celtics. When I defended myself, she bragged about how she'd been supporting the team since before I was born and was there during the Bird era. She kept insisting that these tickets would be better used by a true fan like her. I tried to be polite and explained that while I appreciated her long-term support, these were my tickets that I had worked hard for. But she wouldn't listen. Instead, she started lecturing me about how she deserved the tickets more than me, and how teenagers these days don't respect their elders. Then, without warning, she actually tried to grab my tickets right out of my hand. I managed to keep hold of them, but she wouldn't let go. As we struggled over the tickets, she kept yelling about how she'd been waiting for season tickets for years, and that someone my age shouldn't even be allowed to buy them. People around us started staring, and some were recording the whole thing on their phones. I had to call for security, and while we waited, she tried to flip the story, claiming I had stolen the tickets from her. When security arrived, I explained the situation and offered to prove the tickets were mine with my ID. Meanwhile, she was ranting about how she could prove her fan status with Facebook pictures from the 1980s. The security guards checked my tickets and ID, then told her she needed to leave the premises immediately. She didn't take that well at all. She started threatening to call her lawyer, claiming it was age discrimination. When the guards warned her that they'd have to involve the police if she didn't leave, she resorted to fake crying and claiming assault, even though no one had touched her. As security escorted her out, she was screaming about millennials ruining everything and how she'd get my tickets revoked. The security team was fantastic. They assigned someone to watch my section during the game in case she tried to come back. Several other fans who saw what happened came by to support me and share their own stories about dealing with entitled people at games. The Celtics won that night, making it even sweeter. As I walked out of TD Garden, I could have sworn I felt my dad's presence. I know he would have been proud not just of me getting the tickets, but for standing my ground and not letting anyone take away something I worked so hard for. The next season, the security team actually remembered me and would often stop by my seat to check if everything was okay. I never saw that woman again, though I heard from other season ticket holders that she's apparently known for trying to guilt-trip people into giving up their seats by bragging about how long she's been a fan. Those tickets mean more to me than just basketball games. They're a connection to my dad and a reminder that hard work pays off. No entitled person's attempt to steal them could ever change that. Story 5. Bit of backstory. My family is pretty small, consisting of just my parents, me, Guy, age 20, grandparents, on my mom's side, my uncle, who is a bear of a man, always keeps a stern look on his face and enjoys his drink, and has a pretty nifty whiskey collection, if you can call it that, including a very old bottle that my grandfather gave him before he died that he was always saying he was saving for a special occasion, probably little cousin's wedding. He isn't a drunk or anything though, so don't worry. Aunt and cousin, girl, age 18. Since we are a pretty small family and live relatively close to by, we're all very tight and go on vacations together all the time, and get together multiple times every week. Me and little cousin, however, are exceptionally close, almost like brother and sister rather than cousins. We've always frequented the same schools and have played together ever since we were babies. This is something everyone knows, friends and family alike, as we are usually always together and hang out with the same group of people. It's also worth mentioning that I'm not a very confrontational kind of guy, and I don't think I have ever been in a fight my entire life. So this happened a few months ago, but it's still pretty fresh in my memory. Little cousin had just turned 18, so we had a party with the family to celebrate. A few days later, we decided to get together with some of our closest friends and go out for drinks. Legal age in my country is 18, so don't worry about that. We decide to go to a bar close to her house that I frequent with some friends. Now, since it's little cousin's first real night out and first time ever drinking, her father, despite being a man who enjoys his drink, made a point of not letting her touch alcohol until she was 18. I tell her not to drink too much since she's not used to it. We have some drinks and have some laughs, and all around enjoy a good time in the company of friends. After some time I check my phone to see the time, and notice it's already 2 a.m., so I turn to little cousin who's sitting next to me and tell her it's probably a good idea to head home, since this is her first time out, and we don't want to worry her parents. She agrees. We say goodbye to our friends and head out of the bar. Like I said before, the bar is pretty close to her house, 10-15 minutes walk, so we decided to walk instead of taking a bus. On the way, little cousin asks to sit down on a bench because she isn't feeling too well. We sit on the bench, and I ask her how she's feeling. I can see there's no drunkenness involved here, since I saw what she drank, and it wasn't much, so she probably just has a belly ache since it's her first time drinking, and she isn't used to alcohol yet. We stay there for a while so she can rest and take some deep breaths. Enter the douchebag. As we're sitting on the bench, I see a guy walking in our direction. At first I don't think much of this, since he's probably just going to walk past and ignore us. Nope. He approaches and asks if little cousin is feeling okay, and I say she's just feeling sick from the drinks we had, and that we would be on our way soon enough. This guy proceeds to sit down, uncomfortably close to my cousin, puts his arm around her and starts asking her all kinds of questions. Little cousin is visibly disturbed by this. Not only is her belly aching, now she has this random guy she doesn't know from anywhere getting too close to her and asking her all these questions. She gets up, comes to sit on the other side of the bench and snuggles up to me, leaving me in the middle of them now. The guy doesn't say a thing and just stands up and turns his back to us. Thinking he was about to leave, little cousin whispers to me that she's glad that's over, and I giggle a little. At this point, I don't know if the guy heard what we said or not, or if this was his plan all along, but when I lifted my face to look up at him, he is now turned back to us again with a knife in his hand, pointed at me. Little cousin just freezes, no screams or anything, but her eyes completely glued to the knife. This guy starts yelling, demanding we give him money. I tell him I don't have any money since we just came from drinking with friends. He keeps insisting I give him what money I have, and I keep telling him I have none. He then proceeds to point his knife at my cousin, now yelling even more, and with several profanities added to the mix, and saying what he would do to her if we didn't give him any money. Little cousin has tears rolling down her face at this point, and is shaking in fear. Now, like I said before, I'm not a very confrontational kind of guy, and I'm perfectly aware that if this happened, and I was with anybody else, I would have just given this guy my money, phone, everything. But this guy had the audacity to point a knife and threaten to do things to my cousin, who is like a little sister to me, someone I love to death and who has been with me in the worst moments of my life and vice versa, someone I would take a bullet for. When I see him pointing his knife at her, something inside me just snaps, and I get up as quickly as I can and rush for his arm. I manage to twist it behind his back in an attempt to have him drop the knife, but due to the adrenaline rush or just the anger I was feeling, I used too much strength, and an audible crack was heard. Don't get me wrong here. I don't feel any remorse from breaking this guy's arm, nor am I sorry for it, but I just wanted you to understand that I never intended to break his arm, just to get the knife. The guy collapses on the floor screaming in pain while clutching his arm. I immediately move for the knife and tell my cousin to call the cops. They arrive within 10-15 minutes, and are greeted by a scene of a girl crying, a dude screaming in pain on the ground, and me still holding onto the knife. They yell for me to drop the knife, which I do, and then proceed to handcuff me. At this point, the adrenaline rush has left me, and thinking about the fact that I broke someone's arm, I can't really say anything back. My little cousin immediately intervenes, still in tears, and tells the two officers about what just happened. They check the guy, who is still screaming in pain at this point, saying that I attacked him. The officers immediately notice that he meets the description of a man reported for a stabbing a few days prior to this event. They uncuff me, and little cousin grabs me and starts crying on my shoulder. They call an ambulance for the guy, since he very clearly has a broken arm, and then proceed to properly take our statements. The ambulance arrives while we're still talking to the two officers. Little cousin has stopped crying now, but is still clearly shaken up and hasn't let go of me. They tell me how lucky I was I didn't get stabbed for trying to fight the guy. In hindsight, as I'm writing this, I have to agree with them. It was a very dumb move, and I could have ended up stabbed, or worse, my little cousin could have been stabbed too, and that next time I should just give my wallet. The paramedics put the guy in the ambulance and take him to a hospital. The officers tell me not to worry too much, since I acted in self-defense, and that he is most likely going to jail, but that me and my cousin will probably have to go to court to testify. After making sure we're okay one last time, they ask if we need them to take us home, but since little cousin's house is close by, I tell them there's no need, and they leave after the ambulance. Me and little cousin start running and don't stop until we reach her house. Her parents are already asleep at this point, and since we don't want to wake them up and worry them, I tell her she should go to bed, but that she should tell them about it first thing in the morning. She agrees, and after talking about what had just happened to us for a while, I take my leave, after making sure she locks the door properly, get in my car and drive. When I get home, my parents are still up waiting for me, and ask me how the night was. I retell everything that had just happened as they listen in utter disbelief and in a state of panic, asking if little cousin is okay, and if I'm okay. I tell them everything is fine, and they calm down a bit. They ask if my uncle already knew. I say he doesn't, since he and my aunt were already asleep when we got to their house. As they are talking between each other, trying to process what I had just told them, I start to cry. My parents start panicking up again, asking if I was okay, and telling me that I'm safe now. I tell them I'm not crying because I'm hurt or because I'm afraid. I'm crying because I'm so angry and frustrated, thinking about what that guy could have done to little cousin. They tell me everything's okay now, and that I should probably head to bed and not think about it, but that we would go over to little cousin's house in the morning to make sure everything is okay. I agree and head to bed. The next morning, as we're getting ready to leave, my father gets a call from his brother, my uncle, little cousin's father, telling him to go over to his house and to take me with him. Before turning off the call, my father tells me I'm probably in trouble and that I should start mentally preparing myself for a yelling. We go over to little cousin's house, and before getting out of the car, my parents insist that I go in front and that I should have a good talk with my uncle and my aunt. As I'm going up the stairs to the porch, the front door opens and little cousin comes flying at me with a huge smile on her face and hugs me. I ask her if she's okay, to which she says yes. Then, with a very serious face, she tells me my uncle wants to have a talk with me. I gulp down, preparing myself for the worst, and we head inside. My uncle is in the living room sitting on the sofa. When he sees me, he immediately stands up. Now, like I said, remember that this guy is a hulking bear of man, way taller than I am. I close my eyes and grit my teeth, as anybody would when they're expecting to receive a slap that's capable of propelling them to space. The next moment, my uncle is hugging me, bawling his eyes out, thanking me for protecting his little girl, and saying that I let the guy go easy with just a broken arm. I can't even speak at this point because I was expecting to get a beating. But I'm now in disbelief, seeing my uncle cry, something I never witnessed before. My father is standing behind me in shock as well, since he himself doesn't remember seeing his brother cry, apart from when they were kids. All the while, little cousin is laughing so hard, because she knows I was about to crap my pants. Soon enough, Aunt also comes over and hugs me and thanks me for what I did. My uncle tells me not worry about a thing and says that he will do whatever he takes so get that guy in jail. Story 6. I need to vent about why I've hit rock bottom in my life, and honestly, most of it comes down to my father. My father, being the stubborn man he is, decided to invest a significant amount of money in real estate properties in a developing country, which also happens to be where our family is originally from. I'm a 20-year-old woman, and I've spent my entire life in the Gulf region. My father has been here for 27 years, and I was born here, so I consider it my true home. I genuinely love the Gulf and feel like it's more my homeland than anywhere else. Unfortunately, due to how the Gulf treats expatriates like not offering citizenship despite years of living here, we're stuck in a situation where we have no choice but to return to our motherland once my father retires. Most expatriates in our circle have secured a house to move back to, but my father invested his life savings, around $60 million, in real estate, and $40 million of that money was essentially stolen. The money was taken by two individuals. One is a doctor who used to be my mother's classmate in medical school, and the other is a real estate agent. They lied about the land prices and withheld information about legal procedures in the purchasing and registration process. Because my father trusted this doctor completely, he handed over the money in full cash, and we now have no way to retrieve it. Many of the properties are still not in our possession, with documentation left incomplete due to our limited ability to handle things while living abroad. Since there were no formal legal agreements, and everything was done based on trust, the lands are now left in a state of limbo. My father drained his bank account for this, despite my mother and I repeatedly advising him against it. We tried to convince him to buy or build a house instead, and to only pay after the paperwork was complete, but he wouldn't listen. Now, we're in a complete mess, especially since the doctor has filed a false case against us, claiming we stole his $40 million, which is absurd. This case was filed recently, but the property purchase happened 4 years ago, and my father will be retiring in just 5 months. Not to mention, he's always had certain beliefs that make things worse. He didn't let my mother work, so he was the sole earner. He also refuses to let me work, saying I have to be married to take a job. This leaves us in a terrible situation. We have nowhere to go, nowhere to live. We can't even afford to buy an apartment or a pre-built house because we're now left with nothing. We live paycheck to paycheck, and my father refuses to let us stay with my maternal grandmother or even live in the same town as her, based on outdated beliefs his own father instilled in him. I feel so frustrated. My father seems completely oblivious to the fact that he's the only breadwinner, and that his decisions have destroyed our future. He sold all my mother's properties, and now, while other people are using our money to buy houses, cars, and luxuries, I'm stuck worrying about whether I can afford a discounted $20 bottle of dish soap. The worst part is that he won't even allow me to work. I can't live on my own or move out because, culturally, I am expected to depend on my family. This dependence means I have to rely on him for everything: my studies, marriage, daily necessities, which is both frustrating and humiliating. I'm currently pursuing 3 degrees, so I can't take a full-time job, but he won't even let me get a part-time job to start saving. He won't let me learn to drive either. Every time I talk about becoming more independent, he finds a way to keep me tied down. It's difficult not to feel resentment toward him.